Coming live from Reason's Los Angeles studio, it is glorious here. Today we're talking with Andrew Marcus. He's the director of the new documentary Hating Breitbart. The late Andrew Breitbart is known for his suite of big websites like Big Government, Big Hollywood, Big Journalism, Big Peace. And he's also known for his role in the controversy that led to the congressional defunding of ACORN and the resignation of New York Congressman Anthony Weiner. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks
Andrew.
for having me.
Did you know Andrew Breitbart well?
I did. Over the course of 2.5, 3 years of filming him, I came to know him very well.
And how did the documentary come to be?
I was on the ground covering Tea Party protests even before that, but it didn't take long covering Tea Party protests before my path crossed with Andrew Breitbart. Andrew Breitbart uniquely personified the fight that the Tea Party movement was going through at the time. When they first launched, they were accused of being racist, potentially violent. And at that exact moment, Andrew Breitbart was launching his ACORN tapes and was being accused of the exact same thing. He was being accused of being racist. And Andrew Breitbart sort of found a home, a synergy inside the Tea Party because of that. I was very interested in telling the story of what I was seeing going on in the Tea Party, but Andrew Breitbart really personified that.
And did you share his frustration at the media?
Absolutely. Yeah, I found a real common belief set there with him. I discovered my own frustration with the media. I went to Crawford, Texas for the Cindy Sheehan protests. And I saw the difference between what I witnessed on the ground there and what the media was portraying. And that was really sort of the birth of my outrage at the media because of that. So by the time I came across Andrew Breitbart, I think there was just sort of, we clicked naturally because of that.
And he had an interesting way of categorizing his own political beliefs in the documentary. He said that he was a conservative, but sympathetic to the libertarian movement, and not necessarily a social conservative. So doesn't that really make him a libertarian?
I would think in most circles, yeah, he probably would be considered libertarian for that. But he definitely, I think he's what you would call, I'm going to quote Dave Mastio of USA Today, who says, described it as being a creature of the right. And I think that's what Andrew was. He was of the right. And I think that, like most people in this country, he was center right. So I would think on some things he would have self-identified as libertarian. But I think he was probably also a fiscal conservative, and I think on foreign policy he was probably more conservative than libertarian. So he was a mix.
He was a mix. Mm-hmm. And in 2004, he told Reason that he was actually apolitical, and that Matt Welch described him as having no political philosophy whatsoever. Would you agree with that statement?
I don't think he was intentionally political. I mean, I think he had a huge effect politically. So whether he wanted to be or not, he was political. But his motivation was definitely not political. His motivation, here's a guy who, I call him the perfect storm because he came of age as a contributor to the Drudge Report. He was behind the scenes when the Monica Lewinsky scandal happened, okay?
And was that the defining moment for Drudge?
I don't know. I'm not sure. In terms of Drudge, I don't know. He's kind of a black box. You don't know how to read what his perspective is. But it was definitely for Andrew. For Andrew, I think that he looked at the Lewinsky scandal as a story about the chief executive lying under oath. Okay, and then he watched the mainstream media craft this narrative that it was all about the sex, and that anybody who is interested in this story is only interested in it because of the sex and they're uptight Puritans or perverts or whatever. And I think he was horrified by that. And so it really was what he witnessed in the media that drove him. His whole passion was, he used to say, politics is downstream from culture. And he believed that the politics was almost irrelevant. If you're losing the culture fight, you're done, you're toast. And so while he may have had desires politically in terms of trying to affect politics, I think he saw the source of it as culture, and so he was a culture warrior instead of a political warrior.
And what part did he have in breaking and making the Lewinsky scandal such a huge story? Like Andrew specifically. Do you know that?
I don't
part
know
of his
the
history?
Yeah, I don't know the details of it. Actually, so in the filming of the documentary, there were only 2 no-go zones, and one of the no-go zones was the Drudge Report and his work with the Drudge Report, because Matt Drudge is extremely protective of his brand. Of course, he should be, and so anybody, like there are people out there that work on the Drudge Report that you would never know because they never ever talk about it. So that was one thing. It was a no-go zone. We couldn't talk about the Drudge Report.
That was actually one of the questions I had about the documentary. I'm really interested in that part of his past. I want to know, what part of his history with Matt Drudge made the Andrew Breitbart that we all knew. And did they have a close relationship? Were they friendly? What was the status of their relationship when he died?
I think it was friendly. Matt Drudge came to Andrew's funeral. I mean, I think that's the biggest testament to how Matt Drudge felt about Andrew Breitbart. So I do believe that they were close on that level.
Did you try and interview Drudge for the documentary?
No, because again, it was again, like I said, there were 2 no-go zones. And the other one was Andrew's wife and children, which prevented us from making this film, like a typical biography. It had to be more about his work and his mission and the fight that he was fighting because of that. So no, we didn't pursue it because we didn't want to alienate Andrew, or do anything to, disturb whatever Andrew was doing, because that would be the documentary dramatically affecting our subjects. So.
Did he, off the record, talk about his relationship with Drudge or Arianna Huffington?
Yeah, he talked about Arianna Huffington, certainly. And he was always very proud that he was a part of launching that site because, again, he didn't consider himself an ideologue, and he always used to say more voices, not less. And so I think he felt like his work with Arianna was speaking to that part of himself. Now, I think he was very frustrated with what happened at Huffington Post because he ended up quickly leaving because I think he felt while Huffington Post represented bringing more voices to the macro dialogue in the micro at Huffington Post, I don't think he felt like there was any room for any diversity of thought there. So. Did
Arianna attend his funeral?
No. Well, but then it would have been all about her. I think she was just being nice.
Oh, she's heartless. Let's not kid ourselves. So let's talk about ACORN, because this might have been the first moment where everyone stopped and went, who is Andrew Breitbart? Because Breitbart.com sounds like Reuters.com. It sounds like something that might have been around for a long time. People who didn't know of Andrew Breitbart as the personality might not know that. And this was really the first time that people stopped and said, wait a second, who is this guy? What is going on here?
I think Andrew was always planning on coming out publicly. And again, with the Drudge Report, he could have tremendous influence, but none of it publicly. People began to see the Breitbart brand because he was able to link from the Drudge Report to Breitbart.com. But you're right, nobody knew who he was. He wasn't on anybody's radar until the ACORN story happened. And I think that, and again, for most people, Andrew Breitbart was an overnight phenomenon, but for Andrew Breitbart, that was a pretty consistent line. He was informed by his outrage at what he saw as a fundamental unfairness in the media. And so his whole take on the ACORN story, his whole drive for it was even sort of less about what was happening at ACORN and more about the media. And that's why he staggered the video releases the way that he did, because his goal, I think, was not necessarily to take down ACORN, it was to expose the mainstream media in the process.
And ACORN was defunded in the process. And it was really brilliant, and it worked well for him in this story, because he was able to put out a video, and Bertha Lewis and lawmaker allies came out and said, well, it didn't happen here, they were kicked out there, and then all of a sudden more and more videos came out.
It's the first time that he could think of in memory where such an important policy decision was made to defund this organization without a column inch being written in the New York Times or the Washington Post. The first time they reported on the story was its aftermath. So their readers had to been wondering, well, wait, how did all of this happen?
And while they're reporting on it, they're attacking James O'Keefe for not being a big JNF journalist.
Absolutely. Well, and this is what they did, and this was what we witnessed, and it's part of what led us to go along the theme of Hating Breitbart. And it's really not just about hating Breitbart; it's about hating it's a machine of hatred that's in place, frankly, that is aimed at anyone who is not sufficiently progressive enough. And what they do is they try to attach a meme to you, a label, some kind of idea that gets hooked to you, so that no matter what you do going forward, they can recall that. So in the case of ACORN, they latched onto this notion that James O'Keefe lied about dressing as a pimp going into these offices, because at the beginning of the ACORN videos, he does a sort of a Borat kind of MTV opening, where he's dressed in a flamboyant outfit. Now, when you watch the videos, you can see in the first 16 seconds of the first video when he's walking into the office and his hand goes into frame, and you see he's not wearing that. He's dressed as he presented himself, as somebody who wanted to run for Congress and was looking to launder the money from underage prostitutes for his congressional campaign. My guess is that if he told them he was going to run as a Republican, they wouldn't have helped him launder the money. But because he was going to run as a true progressive, they were willing to help him. So what they tried to do is attach this meme to him, that he's a liar, that he's selectively edited, and they tried to attach that to Andrew Breitbart as well, that he's dishonest, he selectively edits, and the reason that they try to...
What news outlet doesn't selectively edit? I mean, that is the most asinine...
Right. Oh, well, that was part of what made him so furious, was the very people that were accusing him of this make edits all the time.
That's all they do. I mean,
and
look at any news program on NBC or...
Well, not only that, they went even further. They released all of the audio transcripts of all of the audio recordings themselves of the raw material. Now, nobody does that. And even in doing that, they were accused of selectively editing and misrepresenting it. That's what, look what happened. They launched the ACORN tapes. ACORN gets defunded, and investigations happen, and the investigations are not into ACORN. They were into James, Hannah, and Andrew Breitbart.
Now, was he accused of being racist in the ACORN scandal the way he was with Shirley Sherrod?
Yes, not as much. Shirley Sherrod was off the charts in terms of the racism charge. But yes, and that was the beginning of the charge of racism for him. And the narrative went like this. ACORN helps black people. So if you're against ACORN, you're against black people, and your motive is probably that you're against black people. And that was the racism charge that launched it. And they did a smear job on James O'Keefe. He had attended a conference where it was I think it was a white supremacist debating a black guy, and because of that, they determined it was a white supremacist conference, and that James O'Keefe was the organizer, and they smeared him with it for simply attending. These are the people who were for years have held up the specter of McCarthyism and guilt by association, and they were willing to completely associate James O'Keefe with white supremacism simply because he was in the same room with somebody.
Now, the slow rollout with Shirley Sherrod didn't work as well for Andrew Breitbart.
Yes.
Because that really was a piece of the speech that was abstracted. Obviously, he's not going to release a 45-minute speech, but that did not bode well for him. That blew up in his face. Was that his greatest misstep?
Well, that narrative certainly didn't work the way he had intended, that's for sure. But I'm not even so sure that it was his misstep. Look, there's a correction on their website, and anybody can go see their correction, and their correction was specific to, when the story she was telling, when that was the period of time that was referencing. Okay, so now that was a legitimate error that they made, and I think it's pretty common. It's a common error in journalism. You don't want to have that, but that's what corrections are for, and that's why people issue them. What they jumped on, though, the way that they attacked him, was for something that he did not do. What they attacked him for was misrepresenting her in terms of the fact that she ended up helping the white farmer. And that was what if you look back at the news clips, you look back at all their coverage, they immediately got the farmer on the television and had her in the side-by-side with the farmer, and farmer saying, oh yeah, she absolutely helped us, and then the narrative became Andrew Breitbart lied about all of this. But if you read Andrew Breitbart's piece, and if you watch the video he put up, even in the video he put up, Shirley Sherrod says, I eventually helped the white farmer. And Andrew Breitbart in his piece writes, her humanity led her to help the white farmer. So he never covered up the fact that she had eventually helped the guy.
Yeah. And
that was the narrative that got perpetrated, was that he had selectively edited to make it look like she was just racist, and that that she didn't help this guy, and that part of it was all totally manufactured. And he, unfortunately for him, he had to watch the narrative just slip away from him because of that error that they made in terms of the timing of it.
And that's what happens when you're fighting against a machine. If you make one mistake, one misstep, and they will pounce on it and try and smother the rest of the story, regardless of what it is, any ad hoc apology or argument. So John Lewis, civil rights icon, and this is something that's
race
also,
libeler.
And he said that on his way into the Capitol, someone hurled the N-word at him at least 15 times by 15 different people.
They said it was
to
chanted.
him and Andre Carson.
Right.
And you could not find, you show 5 different clips from 5 different angles of the same moment in time by members of what Breitbart called the Army of Citizen Journalists.
That's right.
Did John Lewis and Andre Carson ever come out and retract their claims that that word was thrown at them?
Oh, no, not only that. Not only have they not retracted it, I think as recently as about 6 months ago, Andre Carson repeated it. They have not walked away from it at all. And it's absolutely bullshit. It's a total race libel. Anybody that watches any of the footage that came out of there can see it absolutely never had. You can't find one example of it being used. They said it was chanted. It's a horrifying episode. If you're a fan of the civil rights movement, and I'm a fan of civil rights, I mean, I think what they did in the 50s and 60s was incredibly courageous and brave and was a good thing for our country. And they've crapped all over that legacy with this lie. And it was, I think, a very important point in the documentary in terms of Andrew Breitbart and Andrew Breitbart's thesis, because basically what Andrew Breitbart represents is really one of the first manifestations of being able to harness citizen journalists. He was very quick to recognize that the ubiquity of media, the ubiquity of people's cameras, meant that the mainstream media, who used to be the only people on the scene with a camera, that allowed them to own the narrative, that those days were over. And he knew this from experience because he'd been to enough things where a narrative was created about whatever event that he was at, but there was video footage that showed that that was absolutely not what happened. And it was usually from people who just happened to be in attendance. So he was smart enough to know in today's day of ubiquitous media that if something happened, it was extremely likely that it would have been documented.
And we see that now. I mean, it helped law enforcement solve the Boston Marathon bombing. We're in a postmodernist age where everyone can cast their own net and bring in their side of the story.
Yeah, it's a very activist media, and I don't mean activist in terms of activist for this cause or that cause. It's people, average, regular people who are activated because what they're seeing is whatever niche topic it is that interests them, they're seeing that there's an injustice being done in the coverage of whatever it is that's interesting them. I was activated because I witnessed that in Crawford, Texas, they were calling these Cindy Sheehan protesters grassroots and that they were living in ditches, when in fact they had a football field-sized catering tent that was serving 3 hot meals a day. Cindy Sheehan was in an air-conditioned trailer. That's not even the worst of it. They had their own satellite truck parked right next to the tent where they were producing their own content and uploading it. That activated me. And I'm just one drop in the bucket. People are all over the country in their own unique way witness that there's a disconnect between the reality on the ground and what gets portrayed. And because they're empowered with their camera, their cell phone, whatever, they can cover it themselves and they can circumvent the narrative.
And is that one of the impacts? Is that part of the legacy? Because if Breitbart's existence widened the chasm between new media and old journalism, what is the impact today? What sites do you see? What specific examples? Where do you see Andrew Breitbart's influence in new media?
Well, I still see it at the Breitbart sites. They're still fighting the fight, and they carry on in his honor. But you see it everywhere. Look at Michelle Malkin's Twitchy. Okay, that's a perfect example where she, Twitter was forever was since its beginning was the domain of the left. And that's begun to change over time, and she really harnessed that change by creating a website that aggregates the tweets. And what it creates is a community of activated people who then are able to respond within the ecosystem of Twitter. And she has single-handedly basically driven the conservative movement directly into the liberal movement. So like that kind of, it's bold. She stands up and she takes the fight. People like Jeremy Siegel, rebel pundit out of Chicago, who with his video camera dressed up like an anarchist and embedded with the Occupy movement, and was the only person, the only journalist who ran with them and documented their vandalism. When the mainstream media was portraying them as wholesome, peaceful protesters, he was out there documenting that that's not the case. And people like Jeremy Siegel were absolutely inspired by the likes of Andrew Breitbart. So it's definitely out there. It's not pretty. Individuals will get it wrong. They're not big J journalists. So they'll make mistakes. It's so that's the. But I think it's self-correcting. I mean, it's a big enough community. And again, you brought up the Boston bombings. Perfect example. People were upset that it became sort of like a digital lynch mob. Are these people guilty? Are these people guilty? But I actually found that to be like the perfect example of crowdsourcing, because people were wrong about the questions they were raising, and it was almost immediately debunked. I think that is the beauty of that movement.
Okay, and it can be said that people on the right have Fox News and Drudge Report. People on the left have MS and Daily Kos or New York Times, whatever. Is that also part of Breitbart's influence? Is that a good thing? And is that an honest characterization of how people consume media?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I think that I think that Andrew had an influence in terms of emboldening people to strike out on their own. And so I think you see more and more media that's developed that does that. In terms of on the meta level, in terms of something as big as affecting on the level of the New York Times, I don't know. I feel like it's sort of static. I mean, I feel like we're sort of where we were before Breitbart. You have the Rush Limbaugh, you've got the Fox News. Conservatives have won on cable. Yeah. They've won on radio, and they've lost at the ballot box.
I have two final questions. One, conspiracy theories abound that Andrew Breitbart did not succumb to natural causes. Do you ever give in to those feelings and entertain those thoughts in the middle of the night when they creep up?
They usually creep up in the shower. Look, I'm of the position I can't say with absolute determination what happened, but I can tell you based on what I witnessed of Andrew Breitbart. And of what I witnessed of Andrew Breitbart, as shocking as it is that he died at 43 of a heart attack, I can believe it. The guy, not only did he burn the candle at both ends, he found new parts of the candle you didn't know you could burn. And he had had a heart condition a year prior, so it was a condition that was known about. But I understand why people wonder about it. It's hard to accept that somebody at 43 years old, so active and so filled with life, can suddenly be gone. That and the fact that he had made incredibly powerful enemies. I think that makes people wonder.
Who danced on his grave the moment his death was announced? And my final question: why didn't you include his death in the documentary?
Andrew Breitbart gave us incredible latitude in the production of this film. Okay, what we said to him was, if you let us in, you got to give us carte blanche access, and you can't have control over what we're going to do, because then we'd be making your movie instead of making a film about what we're making this film about. He was amazing about that. So we went through 2.5, 3 years of production without him seeing any of it. And we then gave him a screening of a rough cut approximately 2 months before he passed away. And the guy absolutely fell in love with the movie. He saw 12 different ways of using it as a weapon, and that wasn't our intent, but that was Andrew Breitbart. And after he passed, there was a lot of pressure to make it more of a retrospective, to deal with the death. I just felt committed to tell the story that he saw before dying and make it about what his fight was and not make it about his death. Now, maybe there'll be a sequel called Loving Breitbart where we focus on that, and get into his tactic and the effect of his passing and all of that. But it just didn't seem appropriate for this one. This was about the fight that he was fighting and the movement he was fighting for. And we present the death kind of how we experienced it, very suddenly and very shockingly.
Yeah, at the very end. Mm-hmm. All right, well, Andrew Breitbart lives on in your documentary. Thank you so much, Andrew Marcus. All right, well, make sure you check in with Reason.com for future events, and you can also check out Hating Breitbart for yourself. For Reason TV, I'm Kennedy.